Hey everyone, Eric here. For those who don't know me, I'm a Hillbilly main. I've been playing this killer since 2016, and over the years I've picked up a few tips and tricks. I'm putting together a video series for all skill levels, so beginner, intermediate, and advanced, aimed at sharing what I've learned with my favorite killer. Hopefully by the end of this I'll convince some of you to give Hillbilly a shot if you haven't already. Tip number 1. Unbind your mouse 1 button. This might be the tip that'll frustrate most Hillbilly players, especially the new ones. You're going to constantly hit obstacles, but trust me on this, you're playing Hillbilly, not the Trapper. Spamming the chainsaw is going to be the fastest way for you to learn how to play this killer effectively. You won't win on your first 10, 25, maybe even 50 games, but if you stick with it, it's all about muscle memory and getting comfortable with the chainsaw. Eventually, after a few games, you'll find on certain maps you'll become much more comfortable with the chainsaw and something will click. For me, when I was playing, this was back in 2016, 2017, this is the moment where I actually fell in love with Hillbilly. Learning Hillbilly and his chainsaw is what really got me into him. But yeah, as you go, you'll start to recognize your limits and you'll adjust, setting yourself up for success in the long run by doing this.
Mistimed that one a little bit.
Tip number 2. Approach each loop with a fresh perspective. Now, Eric, what do you mean by this? Well, there's a difference between using the chainsaw for map mobility and navigating specific loops, like jungle gyms, shack, or cars, whatever it may be. But Hillbilly's chainsaw can be tricky to handle in tight spaces, and you might find yourself bumping into things on loops you thought you knew well. That's okay, it happens to everyone. It happens to me quite a lot. I'm a bumper Billy. But a tip that I have is each time you bump into a loop, recognize the collision and learn from it. You know, there's certain tiles that you can hug tighter than others, and especially with, you know, maps changing and everything, everyone can kind of learn from this and practice it over and over again. But the more loops that you're comfortable with, the less you'll need to rely on basic M1 attacks, and you'll be able to utilize the chainsaw a lot more effectively. Tip number 3. Don't worry about using perks or add-ons at the start until you've mastered the chainsaw. Well, maybe not mastered the chainsaw, but you know, you're comfortable with it, you're not scared to use it. You're actually revving it quite a bit, and you're min-maxing your learning ratio. But anyway, it's tempting to jump straight into using add-ons as well, like engravings for speed, boots for sharper turns, and low pro for crazy 180-degree flicks like Numi, but honestly, base kit Billy should be your focus first. Once you're comfortable with the basics of the chainsaw, then you can start experimenting with perks and add-ons to raise your skill ceiling. Think of these add-ons as tools to fine-tune your skill, but until you've mastered the basic movements and mechanics of Hillbilly's chainsaw, add-ons can just complicate things. So just focus on the core mechanics first, and then the rest will follow. Tip number 4. Master the initial portion of the chainsaw sprint. So earlier I mentioned how boots can be beneficial for sharper turns. Well, boots don't actually help with the initial portion. It's like a hypersensitive turning radius, and it's really good for cutting off survivors, especially in tight spots. Add-ons like turning add-ons won't affect the beginning of it, but once you start flicking or try to make sharp turns, more on the next video, it's crucial to get it under control. Practice using the chainsaw initial burst for quick adjustments and sprints. This helps you capitalize on survivors who might just be out of place or trying to loop trickier tiles. It's also great for getting from one place to another. Tip number 5. Be aware of overdrive's impact on spacing. Now, I was debating on whether or not to keep this in the beginner video or to put this more in intermediate, but I think it's honestly important. So when you have a faster chainsaw, right, when you're moving faster, you need to position differently. You're not going to stand in the same spot when you're moving faster and when you're not. When you're moving slower, you need to come to the edge closer. You're able to rip this thing much sooner, and if you actually distance yourself away from loops, you can actually turn into them much quicker. So just something to kind of keep in mind as you're practicing is just, you know, think about your spacing. Awesome. Okay, yeah, so this was the beginner tips. These 5 tips will help you develop a solid foundation for playing Hillbilly, at least in my opinion they will. Spamming the chainsaw and getting familiar with collisions, loops, and add-ons will come with time, but if you're patient and practice regularly, you'll soon find yourself flying across the map, cutting off survivors, and taking full advantage of the Hillbilly's incredible speed and mobility. The most important part is sticking with it, honestly, but if you like the killer, that's an easy thing, and it's really, honestly, easy to get hooked. I've always said this, there's no game like Hillbilly, and that's just because nothing feels the same. Like, Hillbilly himself is his own game. Awesome. Okay. Thanks, guys.